you're watching two GPs in a pod, and you're watching it, which is great. I'm with Dr. Sarah Elliott here, and she's a GP out here. And in particular, she's a GP who's done the fellowship, the Rural Medicine Fellowship. So it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you
Nice
to
to
the
meet you.
show. And so just to start with, this is where Sarah lives. So there's a caravan just behind, and that's where she lives. And this is the view that she wakes up to every morning. It's absolutely
bad.
fantastic. Yeah.
Sometimes feel quite smug.
Yes. So tell us about where you work and how you got into the fellowship to start with, maybe.
So I originally studied in Glasgow, and then from Glasgow ended up working down on the south coast in Brighton because I wanted a bit of sunshine. And when I finished my GP training in Brighton, decided that I wanted to move back up to Scotland. And I saw an advertisement for the fellowship and saw that part of the fellowship they had an acute STEM pathway, and that was in Skye. And so I applied for that, thinking I'd quite like to mix, because I always wanted to mix kind of acute care with GP, maybe a bit of GP and A&E, and came up for an interview in Inverness, flew up from Gatwick, from busy Brighton to Inverness Airport, which if anyone's ever been there is a little box with, it's like a living room.
Yeah.
And did the interview, which was really relaxed and really lovely, and then hired a car and drove for 2 hours through this countryside and rocked up at the hospital there. And as I arrived, they had a helicopter coming in, and it was a day like today, and it was someone who'd fallen off the mountains. And they said, oh, just put some scrubs on and join in. And so that was me sold. I was like, I feel like I'm in a movie.
Brilliant.
And that was it.
When was this?
So this was in 2013.
Okay.
So I literally finished GP training, was exhausted by the busy practice in Brighton, like absolutely exhausted by it. And I thought, well, it's a year contract. And yeah, after a year, couldn't really leave.
Yeah. So the fellowship,
Yeah.
tell us about what it involves. You mentioned this acute STEM as well.
Yeah, so
so tell us about that.
So the GP fellowship is partly funded by National Education Scotland and partly funded by the NHS.
Yeah.
And it's to encourage people who've just finished GP or finished GP in the last few years to become a rural GP, whether that be acutely in a hospital setting or in a rural GP practice. And the reason it's different is because it's so far from your major hospitals. So it involves, I can't remember the exact breakdown because my memory's not that good, but it involves doing at least 3 months of regular general practice, which
Sure.
I did in Broadford
Yep.
surgery. And then the rest of the year, I think I had a work commitment to the hospital for 6 months. And then the other 3 months were kind of do what you want that'll make you better. So
did you get to choose that?
yeah. So I did 3 months of anaesthetics actually, and got my basic competencies in anaesthetics as part of my 6 month commitment to the hosptal. And
So
then
is that like airway, etc.?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the basic competencies are exactly the same ones as anaesthetic trainees do, and I did those in 3 months. And then I used the rest of the time, I think I did a bit of paediatrics and a bit of ophthalmology and anything that I thought, and a bit of orthopaedics, anything that I thought I wouldn't know exactly how to manage this.
Yeah, or I guess that part of the reason for this is because you have an increased scope of what you are required to do.
Yeah.
And so you have to be comfortable with doing a bit more than you would in a city here. And so I guess it's just getting to that level where you feel comfortable.
Yeah, and I think the thing with living here is you're never going to feel comfortable with everything that comes in, because it could be anything. If you're the doctor on in Broadford surgery through the day and there's a car accident down the road, you will be called to it, and you'll be first. If it's a major one, you'll be called to it, and you might be first on scene if the ambulance isn't there. So you're never going to be 100% comfortable, but in that year as well, I did my ATLS, ALS and basics and EPLS as well. And so that obviously added quite a lot to feeling a bit more comfortable.
And did you have to use a lot of that?
Because I was working in the hospital, almost on a daily basis.
And in the hospital, Al was telling me, so you have 20 acute inpatient beds as well.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with that as well as the stuff that's coming in through
Yeah.
the door. How do you juggle all of that? How do you manage the fact that you've got this one room A&E, you've got 20 acute inpatient beds, you've got a fracture clinic that you run as well. So there's so, I mean, of course in general practice, we're kind of doing different things all the time, but this is like another layer, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the difficult thing is as well that after 6 o'clock you're also covering out of hours, so you're also, if there's a home visit for a palliative patient, you're also going to that as well as covering the hospital and the A&E.
Richard said to me, you are the health service out here. And that's something that's really struck me. Compared to where I've worked, for example, in Australia. I've worked rurally in Australia, but in terms of the ways resources have been able to be allocated there, it's slightly different. There is rural medicine there, and it is limited in some degree, but you do have rural hospitals where there are specialists out there, whereas here it's completely generalist. But it feels like a privilege as well. I feel you feel so privileged working here because, especially, well, in general practice and in the hospital, because you follow the patient through their journey. You'll have a patient coming in and out, and then if they're deteriorating, they're coming in and they're familiar. You always have the same faces in A&E that they see, so it's not that horrible. It's not a horrible patient journey, especially for people who are maybe palliative, and a lot of people choose to go into that hospital rather than die at home because they've got familiar faces, and people always, it feels like a privilege. It feels like a real privilege. You feel like you've got the time to be the doctor that you always thought you would be when you first went into medicine. I was reflecting on this earlier while I was in Raze, and one of the things we complain about in kind of busier urban spheres, I suppose, is that kind of, there's so much repetitive administrative stuff that we have to do, and it feels like you're out here, you're kind of, there is to some degree a sense of fulfillment, and it straddles with a sense of uncomfortability, I suppose. But you have this sense of, because you're kind of doing, you're going into the marrow, the meat of what being a medic is, or being a generalist is, and you're kind of getting to use the complex side of what we've been kind of trained for, I suppose.
And you have to hone your clinical skills, because you're not going to get a blood test back until, at the very earliest, if you took it in the morning, you might get it back later at 6 o'clock that night. But if it's a Friday, you're not going to get it back till Monday night. And if you're sending someone for a CT, you've got to be blooming sure that you want to send them, because it's a 2-hour trip, however long at the CT scanner, 2 hours back, you're sending them, and you're probably sending an ambulance off the island. So you hone your... Oh yeah, sorry, this is Trish coming home.
Sure.
So you've got to be very, very sure that this person needs to have a CT. And even for X-rays, even in the hospital after 6 o'clock, you're phoning, or 5 o'clock, you're phoning someone in to come from maybe 20 minutes away to come and do an X-ray. So you're certain that they need to have it. It's just, you're using, I suppose you're using a lot more of your clinical judgment.
So you've been talking about this piece of kind of honing your clinical judgment, and I guess part of that, part of forming that was your experience in the fellowship.
Oh, absolutely,
And what else did you learn in the fellowship?
I feel like the fellowship was like a life changing. So I suppose I learned that you're never going to be 100% comfortable with every situation, but I learnt the skills and the confidence, I suppose, to realise that anyone who's in that same situation can only do what they can do. So unless you've got a helicopter that drops in with a trauma team, if something happens, then you can do as much as the next person can. Even an intensivist or a surgeon can't perform open surgery on the road like they can in the centre of London. And so that makes you not relax into things, but make you realise you can only do what you can do, and you do it as well as you possibly can do. And that keeps you a lot more, I suppose, calmer in the really acute situations. And again,
focus on the things that you can do. Now.
And the same with long-term care. I mean, the services that are available in cities for heart failure patients, diabetic patients, like there's so many more services available. General GP work now, but when you do, you've got to really keep up, because you haven't got a diabetic nurse in the practice who just deals with diabetes.
Yeah.
So you've really got to stay focused, and I feel like that's the balance of the practice, is that you have a 15-minute appointment, not a 10-minute appointment, and you might see 10 or 15 people in the morning, not 20. But you're not just referring them straight on to a diabetic nurse.
How do you think it kind of fits within this, where, actually, would it be better if, the government or the powers that be could actually fund good, specialist nurse services, for example,
course, yeah.
Or having some a specialist to be able to come here in person every now and again, rather than only being able to access them, via video consultation, for example, when you need them. Where do you think that fits? Because, I kind of asked the others this as well, but, there aren't enough GPs to do actually core GP work.
I know.
So then if you're here, and of course you're kind of the only ones here, so you kind of have to do, there's a lot more to what you have to do, but it then means there are still less there's still a recruitment problem. There's not enough GPs out here to actually do GP stuff. So where does that all fit in your thinking?
So I think that here in particular, if we're just talking about Skye, I think that it's getting to the point of being busy enough now, 100%, that having like one of the doctors who works there now is an A&E consultant, and I think absolutely it's busy enough in there that you can justify needing, or not necessarily needing, but benefiting significantly from having a specialist.
Yeah.
I don't think you would benefit from having a surgeon on site, because there's no theatres.
Yeah. Apparently there used to be though.
They did, yeah. And I don't know how much you would benefit from having an anaesthetist on site, because at the end of the day, again, they can only do what they can do without having an intensive care, and we certainly haven't got enough. So I think that's difficult. I think you could certainly have a different style of generalist, but I don't know how you would go about doing that other than A&E. I think A&E would be the only way to run the hospital. In the GP practices and in the smaller community hospitals, I think you actually probably need a GP working in the smaller community hospitals, because there just isn't the intensity of other types of work, and I think the patients benefit from it being a generalist. I think GPs are so adaptable, and I think in a way much less phased by something completely different. You can phone a specialist and tell them about one thing. Well, that patient sounds very complicated, but I'm only asking you about their ankle. Don't worry, we'll talk about the other.
Yeah.
So I think it's very hard. Having been trained as a generalist, we're definitely more comfortable with covering lots of different things.
And I feel like, we always talk about generalists having to deal with uncertainty.
Yeah.
And I feel like that uncertainty risk sink is much deeper here.
Yeah. In a way, yes, and in another way, I suppose in general practice here, compared to in Brighton, you've got a little bit more time to think about things. Because I found when I was in general practice in Brighton, 10 minutes. And
it's the norm here.
Yeah.
I think throughout Scotland actually that you have 15-minute appointments
and you usually get a lunch here as well. Not always, but you usually get a lunch, so you can actually talk about patients at lunchtime and really discuss that uncertainty and maybe come up with a different plan. And you just don't have that in the busy city general practices. Even in probably Scotland in general, the practices I've worked in, you've still got that little bit more time than you have down in the south of England. Certainly, it was.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It's so beautiful here.
Yeah.
I can't believe this is the view that you wake up to every morning. It's amazing. So you did this fellowship.
Yeah.
But then you went away for a bit. You went back to Brighton. Is that right?
No.
Or you went to Yorkshire?
I finished the fellowship and they said there were no contracts, and I thought, okay, well, I love being up here. So I decided that I would go and work in Edinburgh for a little while so that it was still easy. I know 4 hours seems like a long distance, but here it doesn't feel like very far. So it was still easy to come up and do work if it came up. And I bought a flat in Edinburgh, and just as I bought the flat, they said, we can extend your contract. So that's how I ended up living in Edinburgh, but working 10 shifts a month up here. So I was kind of commuting up and down for a year.
Okay.
But I just missed living here full time. I felt like I was only coming up, and I loved the work, I loved the staff, I loved the patients. But I missed this. I missed just sitting around or walking or running or biking when I wasn't at work. Yeah. I felt like I was just then bombing back down the road to Edinburgh, and so then I gave up on the flat in Edinburgh and moved up properly. Yeah. And then I left again about 2 years later. About 18 months ago, I resigned from my permanent post there.
And why did you do that? Were you?
I felt like
were there any pushes from here?
No, I felt like I'd been there at that point for 3.5 years, and I hadn't committed to buying a house, so I felt like there's something holding me back. And so again went down to Edinburgh and did some work down there, and that was enough for me to go, actually no, this is the place I want to be. And then I've been back.
What are the biggest challenges you face working here and living here?
Living here I don't find very challenging at all. I actually love it when the weather's bad. People talk about the weather up here all the time. Yeah. When they come and visit.
It dominates.
I know. Yeah.
It does dominate. When it's awful, it's very overwhelming.
But you find that when it's awful, actually, you love it because you put your fire on and you sit inside and you read a book and you love it. You actually appreciate it because you've still got the views. Yeah. Or you put your waterproof on and actually the sideways wind and rain turns into a rainbow and you're like, it's amazing. So I don't find that side of things challenging, and I don't miss the city. I don't miss the cinema or shopping or anything like that. I don't find any of that challenging.
How about your friends, family?
I mean, it's a long way. My family's still in Yorkshire, so that's really challenging. I mean, having said that, I've now discovered that the train's so easy, so I can actually drive early in the morning and get on a train 6 hours down the road.
Where's the train from?
Inverness, so it's still 2 hours to drive. But
yeah.
But so I miss being close to family, and I miss my friends that I've made that are down in the south that I definitely don't see anywhere near as much. But you feel so part of a community here that you don't miss things as much as you think you're going to miss them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is that with the people that you live around. Yeah. But I feel it struck me that that's the case with your patients and the people you work with. It's very together.
Yeah, it really. I mean, and I mean my family even feel it when my mum and dad come up and visit. They're part of it as well. Like, they're just like, you've got an extended family up here now. Yeah. And the community really pulls together. I mean, there was one really difficult case that I won't talk too much about, but we ended up having to involve the fire service, the police, and even a dive school in the very far north of the island, trying to get hold of different types of gas cylinders. And it was 3:00 in the morning, and the police were driving up and down the island sorting out, and the fire service turned up to see if they had any of the cylinders that we needed, and so it's so easy to pull people together. Yeah. It's amazing.
What advice do you have for people who might be thinking of coming to work up here?
Do it. I think if you enjoy the outdoors and you enjoy people and you really enjoy being a general practitioner, I think there is nothing not to love about being here. I mean, if you're a city person, then yes, it's not the place for you. But if you're not bothered about the city and you really love medicine and people and actually being part of the patient journey, like this is it. It's amazing, and the fellowship is an amazing way to get into it. I can't pun that enough.
I'll put a link to how you can get involved in the fellowship, and the fellowship can be anywhere rurally in Scotland. Is that right?
So, and I've met so many people through it that. I now do quite a lot of locuming, even further north, even more rural than this. This is a city compared to where I work when I'm doing locuming. Yeah. And
do you have to use technical equipment to climb up mountains
Yeah.
to get to a home visit.
Yeah,
basically.
to get to a home
Yeah.
visit. Yeah.
All right.
It's like single track road and then a track off the single track road. And then you meet people who've done the fellowship, and the majority of them have stayed because you just realise the lifestyle is amazing.
Yeah.
And so I go and locum there, and there'll be Sally, or there'll be people there who I've met through the fellowship, and they're doing a week there at the same time as
That's
me,
great.
and so it becomes so sociable. The Highlands GP is really sociable. There's a kind of little locum loop of people that you bump into everywhere, and so you're in a beautiful place, and you go trotting out for dinner with someone who you haven't seen for 6 months. It's lovely.
Thank you so much. It's been a
Pleasure.
pleasure, and I wish you all the best in this
Thank you.
idyllic place.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.